Can you introduce yourself and a little bit about who you are and how you got into Colcha Embroidery?
Well, my name is Annette Gutierrez-Turk. Well, let me tell you about myself. Um, I've been a handcrafter for a lot of years, and I fell into Colcha Embroidery at the Hispanic Cultural Center. I took a class from a Spanish market artist, and then I just fell into that black hole of Colcha Embroidery. I'm a 16th generation New Mexican. My family is documented to have come with Oñate, and I'm really, really interested in um, New Mexico history. I, uh, after learning the stitch, I dropped everything else that I did. At that point, I was a quilter, and I dropped that and just dove head over heels into Colcha Embroidery. I hooked up with a an artist in Santa Fe who was holding monthly meetings of Colcha Embroidery at the Museum of Spanish Colonial Arts. She's become a lifelong friend now. But she introduced me to El Rancho de las Golondrinas. Uh, and I volunteered there for about 12 years. And that is where I learned how to dye my yarn, spin it, and honed my weaving skills. I am a weaver. I weave my own background fabric for this technique, and I spin my weft. So there's a lot of handprints on my work. Um, from Las Golondrinas, I had always been interested in an historical site in Corrales, New Mexico. Corrales is just about 10 miles from my home. And I decided to drop Las Golondrinas, which is just outside of Santa Fe. The mileage was beginning to kill me, and I now volunteer. I'm a docent at Casa San Isidro, and it's a historical home that was built in the territorial period, and it's a property of the Albuquerque Museum. I don't teach there yet. I do teach in Corrales occasionally. We've never established culture gatherings at Casa. So between my tour times at Casa, I have two groups that meet in Albuquerque. I'm a part of a group that meets in Santa Fe, and another group that meets in Socorro. In fact, we're meeting tomorrow in Socorro. So it is there's active interest in Colcha Embroidery. A new group was just formed in Abiquiu, New Mexico. And there's been an ongoing group in Taos. I don't go to Taos very often, but I do go there occasionally to meet with those ladies. So we're pushing the needle here, but oh golly, what a pun! I I'm just passionately interested in it. That's all there is to it.
So, what is Colcha Embroidery, or what is sort of the background, or why is it unique to our culture?
Colcha embroidery is basically a couching stitch. That's all it is. Um, I'm sure that the early settlers, I believe, adopted it as a mending technique because it was fast. You got quick coverage. Of the ladies of the colonial period had very little time, and everything had to be their time had to be apportioned economically. So this is the couching stitch is the stitch that they adopted, and it's known by other names throughout the world: Baccarat, Romanian, Basma. There are a lot of names for it. It's just it's a stitch that's been around for thousands of years. It's been found in archaeological sites, but it is the one that the settlers adopted when they came to New Mexico and southern Colorado. You asked earlier what makes it so different from regular embroidery. There are 21 different stitches of crewel embroidery. There are probably even more stitches than are identified as crewel stitches. But this is one of them, and it's a couching stitch. By regular embroidery, maybe you're talking about a cross stitch or a back stitch that was used in household embroidery. There was a period of time when uh, women embroidered tea towels for the home, or they embroidered motifs on a tablecloth. And so I'm assuming that's what most people consider to be um, regular embroidery. This is simply one of many, many stitches in the embroidery book. If you look up couching or Romanian or Baccarat, it's it's the colcha stitch. Colcha is a misnomer. Colcha is a Spanish word for bed covering, quilt, blanket, and I think when interest was generated in items that were embroidered here, when they asked a woman, well, what is this? A woman who was um, doing that type of embroidery. Well, what is this? And most probably she was working on a bedspread. And she said, it's a colcha. It's actually bordado. Bordado is the Spanish word for embroidery. But not understanding the question and the questioner not understanding what they were even asking, they were told that what the woman was embroidering on was a blanket and it wasn't the stitch. But the name Colcha stuck, and we've had it since oh the 20s and 30s, and it looks like it's going to stay. The early colonists used to use the stitch for, I believe, firmly believe, they started using it as a mending technique. Instead of making a nasty patch on an item that had worn down, they decided that they might embroider a motif in that spot. And as time went on, the blanket needed more and more patching, and it became more of a decorative item. And the colonial women in any part of the world uh, had no time to sit down at a hoop, have the sun shining in the window like we see in all the medieval pictures. Uh, there was no time for that. This was quick and easy. Um, I I call it an easy technique. The hardest part is your tension, and I believe that's why they adopted it. It was quick, easy. It gave them good coverage. Some of the early culture embroideries that were created simply for decorative effect uh, covered in the background. I don't cover in my background because I weave the fabric, and then I'd lose that part of my art if I stitched behind the motif. So my motifs always stand out from the fabric.
So what is it about? Because I know how early did this start? Do
Well,
we know?
it had to have started when the settlers came to New Mexico. They had uh, the wagon train, the supply train came up from Mexico City twice a year, so 6 months. And if they needed to make a bed covering or make a garment, the wool from the sheep that they brought with them had to be carded and spun, woven to create an item of utility or an item of dress. They had to have started mending when they got here, as things would wear out, tears in textiles, and we don't have any representations from that period because of the Pueblo Revolt. During the Pueblo Revolt, they just picked up and ran. They took what they absolutely had to. So you didn't necessarily take your blanket. You would take your child or your fry pan with you. And so we don't have any uh, examples of Colcha embroidery from that period. Our earliest ones are the late 18th century, and they are in museums.
Where are there some examples of that at the Hispanic Cultural
Yes,
Center?
there are some in their collection. They're not always on display. Uh, there are many in the Albuquerque Museum, again, and mostly in the vaults. International Folk Art in Santa Fe has a lot of embroideries. Museum of Spanish Colonial Art, Millicent Rogers in Taos, and the Harwood in Taos. Um, there are a lot that have been preserved in museums and continue to be represented in museums. I have a piece myself in the Museum of Spanish Colonial Arts. One year at Spanish Market, a collaborator and I won the museum award, which meant that the museum purchased it. And it was a sewing box. And he carved the sewing box and then handed it to me and told me to embroider something for the top and the inside panel on the lid, and that would coordinate with his carving. And so that's what I did, and we won the collaborators award, the museum award, the utilitarian award for that sewing box. And it is really pretty. So it's on display today at the Museum of Spanish Colonial Arts in Santa Fe. And it's been up there almost a year. So I don't know if that's just going to be something that's permanently up there. I can hope, but whatever. Uh, there are a lot of pieces throughout New Mexico, and you won't always find them on display. If you request of the curators, um, the curating staff, if you can have access to those pieces, they're likely to allow you to go down into the vault with them to view them. So that's something you could do when you come to New Mexico. There are even some in the Farm and Ranch Museum in Las Cruces.
What are some common motifs? Were there some specific designs that were more popular than others or that show up more than others?
Um, One of the trends is to make religious designs, saints and religious motifs, but the everyday embroiderer will generally choose birds and flowers. And when you pick up books on Colcha embroidery, all the patterns are um, birds and animal motifs. The Now the embroiderers of the early days, they were not artists. So some of their designs are kind of awkward looking, but I think that just adds to the charm of the early embroideries. You'd find leaves with three different colors. Leaves were not always green. It was an opportunity for someone to use those little scraps of yarn. And so you might have a three-colored leaf. It would be artistically arranged, but it wouldn't be a green leaf. It was just an opportunity to use all those scraps. So if you're spinning the wool and dyeing it, you're not going to let any piece go to waste. And that's generally how I teach, even if I'm using commercial yarn. I like people to know that just because you have a 12-inch piece of uh, wool yarn, it's not trash. It can be used, and you should use it. It's really a very economical embroidery technique if you're using commercial fabrics.
Would, back on that era when they maybe didn't have access to a lot of materials or resources and kind of had to make do, is how a lot of this stuff came about, right? So was this, would these materials like have be brought up in the supply wagons, or is this something that they're like your average person would have their own sheep and be spinning their own, doing that own, or was there a market for it, or?
They were making things primarily for utilitarian purposes. Now they would weave the fabric. It's a plain weave made with a churro wool, and it was all natural color. They wouldn't be dyed. Fabrics would not be dyed, and those were sent down south uh, as trade items in return for iron for the foundry, or a pot or anything, that hammer or whatever that they might need here in the territory. But as for sending down embroideries, I'm not sure that they would have. Well, they just didn't have the time to produce something like that. The Manila trade that came into Acapulco was bringing embroidered items, those beautiful triangular shawls that you see with a really long fringe and the beautiful flowers. Those all came from the East, and they were part of the trade in the Manila shipments. But as for getting motifs, uh, a lot of the patterns that persons would and are still employing in embroidery are from chintz fabric, a flower or a representation of a bird, even though they were looking at the surroundings where they were living and were able to you see a flower and you execute it in embroidery. You draw it on your fabric and then you embroider it. They got their patterns from nature and from items that may have been brought up in the trade wagons from Mexico.
And so would they would dye the yarn that they were using?
Yes,
What
yes.
what were some of the things that they would use to dye?
You can use onion skins. You can use sunflower petals. Uh, there is uh, a grassy-like plant called cota. It's uh, it's a medicinal tea. We call it Navajo tea. That produces a beautiful yellow color. Um, bark, different bark from trees, will produce a color. Foodstuffs do not yield a permanent color. It's fugitive. So they wouldn't use, if you're eating, you've made a pot of red chili and it, it splashes your garment. You never get that stain out, but it's always there. And so it wouldn't, it would fade on, if you dyed yarn with it, uh, it would eventually fade, but it wouldn't be that rich, beautiful red color. Vegetables weren't trying to think of any vegetable that it might actually stick to the yarn, but it would mostly plants. And then there were trade items of indigo and cochineal from Mexico. And those, of course, are can be made to be permanent dyes. But those were trade items. Those were not items that could be harvested here.
So would your average woman have done her own dyeing of yarn or?
Absolutely, it was a children's job to go out and pick the plant uh, for the dye pot. The women did all the work. The women would, well, the children would card the yarn, card the fleece, and the women would spin it, and then the men would weave the fabric. That was the traditional way back.
And you did mention before we started recording about another class that you're teaching that I can't remember the name, but it's more of a weaving.
No, no, I weave my own fabric, but I know just enough to be dangerous when it comes to the loom. I know enough to weave the plain weave, but that I'm a one-trick pony. That's the only thing that I weave. I don't try to teach. No.
What was the one that you said was a little bit more advanced?
Oh, that was the one for the Embroiderers Guild of America, the regional chapter, Rocky Mountain uh, embroidery chapter, and it's the Rocky Mountain states that belong to that. I'm a member of one of the Albuquerque chapters, the Sandia Mountains chapter, and so when we've done seminars, either national or regional, I've had the opportunity to teach Colcha Embroidery um, at those venues. I think you mentioned that you had ordered some books from Sandia Mountains. I am the publications chair. That's one of my other hats. And I wasn't aware that that was something that you were interested in. If you'll email me with what you'd like, I can quote you a price um, and ship them to you. Okay.
Yeah, what if someone just wanted, like me, just doesn't know anything and wanted to get started? I mean, I've done some cross stitch and a little, I've done some tea towels, but otherwise I'm really not, and I've knitted and crocheted, but someone who's brand new, I was just sort of just putting out some feelers online and I found the Embroiderers Guild had put out they did have a book of patterns that were sort of more religious. So I ordered that. Of course, that's going to be too advanced for me at this point. But then there was a beginner pamphlet as well. And I ordered those through the Espanola Fiber
Oh, okay.
Arts
Okay.
Center, just because I think when I just Googled it, that's what popped up. But then as I realized that there are other
I
resources available, or people can order those directly from the guild or.
They can order them from the Sandia Mountains chapter. If they would like to go, they can go on Facebook and indicate that they are interested in the brochures, and then I could contact them from there. Um, I sell to the Espanola Valley Fiber Arts. I deliver uh, books to them for sale on their shelf. I also sell to El Rancho de las Golondrinas, their gift shop. If I can find a gift shop who will stock them, I'll approach them. But basically, it's me and my dog and pony shows and my classes. Tuesday's class, uh, people bought books, so that's basically how I get the word out.
Yeah,
But it's on Facebook, Sandia Mountains chapter, and tag a message on there. They'll give it to me, and I'll see what anybody would like to would be interested in. You're right that that little book the is $3 because I sell them at cost, whatever it costs for us to print them. And then the religious book, we call it the Santos book, and it's not really above a beginner. It's $10, but it's not so advanced that a beginner couldn't use it because it so often is just straight stitching. Um, as you practice the technique, it's only one stitch, and you're learning your tension, and then you graduate to a curved stitch, like a little arc. It's really a simple stitch. It just takes a little bit of practice to feel comfortable with it.
you provided a very helpful sort of first little pattern and then the materials that you would need with some Albuquerque resources, but I live out of state. So I have had a little bit of trouble sourcing some of those materials. I was able to find the Osnaburg fabric at Joann's in like a remnant
Mm-hmm.
in the upholstery section. I still have not been able to locate the yarn, but would you be able to provide, like if you sent me an online resource, I think you mentioned in the class that there might be an online.
There are a lot of online resources, and basically, Brown Sheep is one that I utilize regularly. It's the Brown Sheep Company, and it's in most needlework shops. But I can send you some websites where you might find it. The way I found them was just to Google the words 3-ply wool embroidery. And then all these companies popped up, these embroidery shops that sell online popped up, and you just go from there.
Okay. Yeah, I had a little because I think the material instructions said embroidery yarn. And
Yes.
I had some like the results that I found weren't coming up embroidery yarn or I was struggling a little bit. So maybe a specific link would be really good. Although of course we love to support local places, but I have the yarn shop I went to in the city here ended up not having it. And so, but they sent me to, there's another one in Oklahoma City that might have it. So I'll try that first, but then might do an online purchase if I can't find it locally.
One other thing, in the early days before I started spinning and dyeing my own yarn, I went to a yarn shop, and when I walked in, I told them what it was, that I was doing Colcha Embroidery and that I needed yarn. And they said, oh, you need to buy this. Well, they said, everybody who does Colcha Embroidery is using this. And I've only ever met one other person who is using it, and it's because I told them about it. It's sock weight yarn. The only problem with buying a skein of sock weight yarn is that you have a lifetime supply of that color. If you love the color, you're good to go. If you've been a knitter and you have some wool yarn, uh, I would just recommend that you find a fabric that the yarn flows freely through it and just use that to start with. The basic rule is your fabric and your yarn have to be compatible. You can't pull a yarn through a fabric that is too tightly woven because your yarn is going to break and it's also going to get very fuzzy as you pull it through a tight fabric. So you just need to match the thickness of your yarn to the weave of your fabric. Why don't you just go on to the Brown Sheep um, website? Some of my ladies are already buying it from Brown Sheep, the ones that don't live in Albuquerque. We have a shop here in Albuquerque that sells it. But it comes in little skeins and it's called Waverly, but it's manufactured by the Brown Sheep Company. So you could Google Waverly or Brown Sheep and you'd find this product. And maybe that'll lead you to local shops because the shop in Albuquerque that carries this is a knitting and crocheting shop. It's just that they started carrying this because they realized there was a demand for the 3-ply wool. You know, that could be the case in your area.
Yeah, I think maybe I found that yarn shop in Oklahoma City because it was as a location on the Brown Sheep website, but they did not carry it, and then they had never heard of Colcha Embroidery.
No, nobody will ever know the word culture. Ever. But they do know the word embroidery, and they know the word wool yarn for embroidery. So, yeah, you're not going to find anybody who understands what the word culture is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there a specific type of sheep that is more traditional or?
Yeah. When the settlers came to the New World from Spain, the King of Spain would not permit them to bring their merino sheep because he was tightly vested in the wool trade. But he did allow them to bring the churro. And in Spain, it's called churra, Churra. Somewhere here in the Americas, the A became an O, which doesn't really matter. But that was the sheep that they brought into Mexico and Peru, the Caribbean, and to Mexico. So that's the wool that the sheep that the settlers brought up. They brought 5,000 head with Oñate, and that the churro was used for its fleece as well as for its meat. When Coronado came with the churro sheep, that was their meat supply for his soldiers. And so I doubt that any were left behind when Coronado came through. But when Oñate came, the purpose of the sheep was for the wool, fleece, and the weaving. So that's a churro sheep. It's traditional. And when I weave my own fabric, I use the churro fleece for that. So everything that I make is pretty much 100% churro, unless I find a really classy color yarn out there that I just have to use. So I've been known to mix like a merino and churro mix. Oh, it's just gorgeous because the way the light shines off of a merino mohair, it's really pretty. But anyway, yeah, churro is our name.
And so you kind of mentioned this earlier, but you really don't want, because some of the stuff I was looking at online and what was available from Brown Sheep at that yarn store was a big You
Yeah.
really don't want like a ton of one color. You want to, it look like you could get even on the
Unless
brown, I think on the brown
unless
sheep
for those
website.
colors that you absolutely adore. Like if you love turquoise color and you're going to put turquoise in everything, sure, go ahead and buy one of those in the soft weight yarn. It's economical. But or if you're going to if you want to do the background, uh, fill in the entire background, then that would be another economical use of a skein of soft weight yarn. But you get 8 yards in one of these brown sheep skeins. There's 8 yards here, and you separate it into thirds. Each strand is the 3 ply. So then you've got 28 yards of a color, and that's plenty for a while.
So you can order, it looks like on the website, you can get a bunch of different colors, or you can get a variety pack of colors.
Right? I don't know. I haven't seen that they have a pack, an assortment, but they might. I mean, and that might just be the way to go. You can also buy their um, color chart. I think their color chart is $10. They shipped it to me because I have a commercial account with them. Yeah, brown sheep is really a very economical way to go. You can pay anywhere from $2 to $3 for a skein, and 8 yards times three, that'll last you a good while.
And this was sort of, it's utilitarian. I know when I was in the class, you sort of, you have all of your yarn is on the front, but when you turn it over on the back,
Yeah,
there's not very much, and that's meant to be
I,
economical. And
yes, it there's not to be very much on the back. The back is simply to show you, to give you a hint of what the front of the embroidery you're really saving. In crewel is the same front and back because they take large stitches.
so tell me about the classes. I was so excited to learn that you're offering the Colcha Embroidery class on Zoom. I mean, it's in person, but also there's a Zoom option.
Yeah. Well, Tuesday was a bit of a zoo. Um, it was advertised on Facebook. Hadn't been advertised for several months. We're just getting geared back up. We started Zoom during COVID. The center thought, oh, let's try Zoom. And Colcha Embroidery might be the one to test it on. And so far, I'm the only one that they've put on Zoom. But that's how it started. It started in my office here. It went very well, and then COVID ended, sort of ended anyway. I was asked to come back in person, and it's a little bit of a juggling act. I feel like I'm either neglecting the people who have walked in, especially if they're new students, and then I'm ignoring the ones on Zoom, and it becomes a little bit of a zoo. I had 7 new people on site, and then I had 3 on Zoom, and it was interesting trying to juggle all of that. But all I teach, you mentioned wanting to learn more about the history of New Mexico on Zoom. I don't. I can teach you a little bit. Well, basically, what I've spoken to today about the history and why it's connected to New Mexico. But there are some other Zoom websites that you can tune into. They're how I get a lot of my history. I tune in. I have on Facebook, I have friended a lot of the museum and historical sites. So I know what they're doing. Either they're having some event on their property, or they've got a speaker who is coming in, and it will also be available on Zoom. And I tune into a lot of those. The New Mexico History Museum in Santa Fe um, puts all of their lectures on Zoom. It's worth um, subscribing to their messages on Facebook.
And so the classes are offered at the National Hispanic Cultural Center
Mhm.
in Albuquerque on the is that the third Tuesday or fourth Tuesday?
Fourth Tuesday of the month.
And it's called a Stitch Along. So it's meant to be probably you don't have as many new people who are trying to learn. It's people who already know how to do it that want, that community of other
New
cultures.
people every month. Some of the regulars that come by, we're like a little club. They were once my new people there at the Hispanic, and they just keep coming. Uh, the purpose of having these meetings in person, if you feel comfortable with a stitch and you're doing it, it's just that we inspire each other. You'll see what somebody else is doing and think, that might look good over here, or I'm going to have to try something like that. And, we talk about where our an inspiration came from the project that we're working on, and um, there's a lot of really good conversation that goes on when people get together. After this, I'm on my way to one of my chapters gatherings. Everybody is doing something different. The It's the chapter for the Embroiderers Guild of America, and we're all doing something different. And I just take my Colcha Embroidery, and uh, we just sit and stitch. It's wonderful for that. It's kind of like a quilting bee, except we're each doing our own project in our
Mhm.
own way, at our own pace. No judgment. Uh, Lots of good conversation.
So there's the class on the fourth Tuesday at the Hispanic Cultural Resource, or I always call it that, National Hispanic Cultural Center. And then there was one at the
The
biopark.
the Albuquerque Biopark, the aquarium site. We're not on the zoo side. We're on the aquarium side, and that is the first Thursday of the month. It will we'll meet on February 1st for February, and it's the same thing. We sit there and we do it. We work on our project. Visitors to the aquarium have no idea that we're there. They walk around the gardens, and they come upon us, and we're just asked to interact with the people, the visitors who come in. They want to know, what is that? There's a sandwich board outside the building saying that they're a group in there doing Colcha Embroidery. And they say, well, what is that? Why is that different from regular embroidery? I get that a lot.
Mhm.
And so we just give them a little bit of the history, show them what we're working on. I usually have a couple of finished projects laid out on a table so that they can see what we've done, what you can do with the. You don't have to embroider your draperies. You don't have to embroider a king size uh, bedspread. You can do small projects. You can make jewelry with it. There's just any number of things that you can do with Colcha embroidery. It's just a stitch. A lot of people put them on their jackets. Um, I've had two students who went ahead and embroidered on their denim jacket. God bless them. I would never try that, because you can imagine how hard it was pulling the yarn through that very, very tight weave. But they ended up with beautiful motifs on their jacket. They love it. They're very proud of it and a beautiful job, even though I tell you not to embroider on anything that's too tightly woven. People will do what they'll do, and they come out with a beautiful project.
Great. So people can sign up for that class on the National Hispanic Cultural Center website.
And you are welcome to share my email address with anyone that you think is having problems or is interested in tuning in on the Zoom program.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Annette. This was so wonderful, and I'm so excited to. I think I need to probably just sit when I finally get my yarn, just sit down and practice a little bit on my own, and then when I have the class next month, then I'll be able to ask some questions and.
Yes, and if Google couching stitch, embroidery couching stitch, some version of that, you can see videos of people,
Mm.
and that'll help you get
Okay.
along. And if you you downloaded that little practice piece that okay, that at the top there's a little stitch guide to remind you, you know, how the needle goes through the fabric, and then you've got those books. So
Okay.
oh,
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. This was so great.
you're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Luminaria. You can reach me at luminariapod@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is of Varsoviana, performed by Nieves Anaya and his daughter Ernestina Anaya at Arroyo Hondo, New Mexico in 1940. It's part of the Juan Bautista Rael collection at the Library of Congress.